Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the intro. Like Alex said, I am the host of today's session, and I'm joined by some incredible product marketers who I've been following on different channels for quite a while. So a little starstruck here, not gonna lie. Yeah, I'll hand it over to the panelists to introduce themselves. Marcus, go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yes, my name is Marcus Andrews. I'm Senior Director of Product Marketing at Pendo. I've been working in product marketing or something close to it since like 2010, 2011. And yeah, I'm from Indiana, but after college, I moved to Boston and worked in Boston for a little bit, and then spent 5 years in San Francisco, worked at startups, worked at Google, moved back to Boston, worked at HubSpot for about 5 years, which is how I know Nisha, how me and Nisha know the same people. And then, yeah, I think like about 3.5 years ago, I moved over to Pendo. So yeah, love product marketing. I think the thing that I'm best at when it comes to my product marketing skills is storytelling, and I've got this narrative design framework, and it's something that it's the part of product marketing I like to sort of like learn about the most and geek out on the most. So excited to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Marcus. Nisha.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Nisha Goklaney. I am actually currently in Houston, Senior Director for HubSpot, and I lead a portfolio of their marketing, service, and AI suite of products. Been here about 3 years. I'd say before this, had a lot of experience. Oh my gosh, I might be dating myself, but about 15 years of experience. Started off as a product manager and kind of grew up the ranks there. I really like that because it helped me have an orientation that is more like with the customer and actually building for the customer, and then kind of transferred into product marketing. Spent the past 6 years right before this actually in Asia Pacific. So what I really like is like having the balance of experience from both North America as well as Asia Pacific and relearning the customer and what their expectations are. I'd say what I love with product marketing is all the launches. I really like bringing to market a launch to a customer that helps them with a pain point that they're experiencing and doing it in a meaningful, inspiring, and like exciting way. Yeah, a boy mom. I have 2 kids. I always like to talk about that as well. So the struggle is definitely real. I have a part-time job, post 5 o'clock, shuttling the kids around and being an Uber driver. So at Uber Eats and all the things. So that's part of my role as well. And I see Katie back. Katie, would love to kind of pass it on to you to introduce yourself.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Katie Gregorio. I head up product marketing for Creative Cloud at Adobe. I have a really non-traditional background to tech and to product marketing. I spent the first chapter of my career in international finance and economic development. I always say I got to see the world in my 20s, which was good because I also have 2 children and they do require a lot of attention. And then I got into tech and I worked at 3 different startups before I joined Adobe. I've been in the tech industry for about a decade and have focused on the data industry. And then for the last 5 years, 7 years on the creative tools industry. And I think we're supposed to say what our favorite part of product marketing is or what we like. Okay. So my favorite thing to do is to talk to customers and figure out how to lay the groundwork to tell a great story. And I feel very strongly that positioning is the way to do it. But I love to just engage with customers across the evolution of a product's development, just to hear how they're reacting to what we're putting out and to hear how we can bring more of the voice of the customer into the product development process.
Awesome. Well, it's great
Sorry,
meeting
I
all
was
of
having
y'all.
technical issues, but I'm back now, I think.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you for those intros. As Alex said earlier, if you find the Q&A chat in the Zoom call, feel free to post your questions there. I see a few questions already rolling in. But thank you, Alex, for that comment there. First question for the panel is, how would you recommend aligning your storytelling with key business objectives in a way that is authentic to your target audience? Marcus, do you want to go first?
Sure. I also have 2 kids. I feel like we all got 2 kids. It's fun.
Hey,
We just had
same.
a baby girl. You too, Jeff? Well,
Yeah,
look at
yeah.
us. We have 2. You're not allowed on the panel unless you have 2 kids. How do you, yeah. So, I mean, I think one thing here is that I would maybe question to begin with is like, aligning your storytelling to the key business objectives. I think good storytelling sort of trickles down from the key objectives. Like, so I didn't say it, but someone said it, but I've heard people say like, your story is the strategy. And I love that because I think that like, companies can have really good strategies and most do. And then I think they fail quite often. And it's because they never turn into something that is like, can motivate people internally or like move the market or turn into good marketing and sales because they never turn into a story. So, I don't ever think of myself as like, oh, I'm gonna invent a story and then try to make it match the KPIs of the company. Like I'm gonna do everything I can to really understand the business strategy and why we're doing the things we're doing, and then craft the story off of that. So like that's the relationship between those two things that I see. Like I'm supposed to give an example. So when I was at HubSpot, we launched Service Hub, and one thing we did was we knew we wanted to create a new product line. And we knew we wanted that product line to drive incremental revenue from our customer base. And we started there. And then the story that ended up coming out of that was the flywheel story, and how like the marketing we're retiring it, we're moving to the flywheel, and the flywheel is this, new way to sort of run your business. And it's only possible to play this new game by buying Service Hub, right? So like we didn't come up with that story before we came up with the company strategy, and I didn't come up with the company strategy, right? Like I worked on the story, but the strategy is first and the story is second. So yeah, and happy to talk more about it, but I'll pass it on to whoever wants to take that one on next, or if anybody else has thoughts.
Yeah, I really like that. I like the strategy comes first and comes the story. I'd probably say very similar. I think I like to orient to what is the change in the universe and what are customers feeling and what are their pain points. It's really not about you. It is very much about what is your ideal customer, what is the change happening to them, what are their challenges, and what is the pain that they're experiencing, and then how does your product or solution solve for them? The example I'd probably give is we just did a launch earlier this year with Content Hub. And Content Hub is really designed for marketers. And what's happening, I mean, I'm sure there's many marketers in the room over here, is, there's many more channels coming out. There's TikTok, and YouTube's becoming more important with the new generation coming out. Like they're basically discovering products on YouTube, on Reddit, different ways, right? And you can't really create this content on one channel, and it has to be natively created. Otherwise, it doesn't rank on LinkedIn, it doesn't rank on YouTube, etc. So we saw that big change in the world. And then we're saying that, hey, you got to create all this more content, but you don't have extra people for it. And so born there was, hey, how can we take our Content Hub, which is a tool traditionally we were used to use just to market building your websites, to how do we actually make it as the one-stop shop to help marketers create and manage the content in a flash, so it's really the pain that they're experiencing, which is creating more content, native content with flat budgets. How do we make it simple and easy for them and connect the two? And what we've now have, because we've repositioned it and relaunched it, we've been able to actually attach it about 50% of the times to our primary hub, which going from 10% at the beginning of the year, it's been huge, right? So it's just, again, just trying to connect the outside in perspective and what's the change and how do you solve for the customer is the kind of orientation I look for.
Yeah,
Great.
so I don't want to repeat what either of you said because I agree with it 100%. But I think we've been talking a lot about the story for the customers, and I think add what it's like to create an investor deck alongside that. So when I was at Figma, we were launching Figma 2.0, which was bringing the multiplayer conversation with designer and designer. I was there a long time ago, at the same time that we were raising our Series B. And there was a lot of internal discussion about the audience and really understanding the story that you want to tell to investors is a vision story. It's about where you're going. It's looking forward really far into the future. And then, as Nisha was saying, you really want to understand what the pain points are that your target audience are having for your launch or for your sales motion, because no one wakes up and says, I want to buy your tool. They are waking up and looking for a solution. And you want to show not only why your solution is the best, but why it brings them the most value. So it is about the strategy, but it's also about the execution. If you're enabling the sales team, if you're bringing kind of a new product or new features and you have to put it onto the website to launch. So it really requires tons of thought about the positioning and the messaging and how you craft it, but then also how do you bring it to life through all the different channels that you bring it, in particular with the sales team, making sure that they stay on message and everybody's aligned.
Yeah, I think the important thing there is just make sure that the story you're telling and the audience is for your customers and not for, how is it going to help grow the business? How is it going to help us win new revenue? You want to make sure that the story is aligned to those customers, to their pain points, and how you're going to provide value to them. So thank you all for your input on all that.
You still see that all the time. I see it constantly, like in social media and like emails and stuff. It's like, the message they lead with the company is like, hey, we are great. Like, we are so great. And that's not about the customers, and like the execution is really poor. So you see that all the time.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that kind of leads into the next question. So y'all already shared some examples of success stories, but can you share an example of a time in your career where you failed in trying to shape a new narrative?
I could go fast. I think we had a massive fail over here with, so I worked at American Express back in the day, early career. And I remember this vividly. And like I came in and I was told to launch this product called an ID theft score. Identity fraud was a big, was happening a lot with cybersecurity and like more risk, et cetera. And Amex obviously is known to protect customers. So we were like, hey, let's, put a score out there. And let's then on the back of the score, try to sell an ID protection software. And we, spent the next, I'd say 6 months or so building this score off the backbone of the algorithm we had. And we took it to market. And guess what? No one bought. It was actually a pretty egregious failure and didn't turn out as successful. And really the learning for me there early career was, one, we had not really rooted it in customer insights. And when we went back to the market after the launch to ask, hey, why is this not exciting or interesting for you? We learned, well, Amex, we expect you to have this score as part of the offering to us. It's not something additional. I thought you were always monitoring my score anyways. And then 9 out of 10 times the score was actually low. So it never incentivized any action on the behalf of the customer. So it really, what it taught me was go back to customer mindsets. Also, when you're young in your career, don't be scared. If you really can't speak up and you feel like you have to launch this thing, look at data, look at customers, leverage those as data points to actually, if you have a different point, if you bring that to the table, and orient to customers throughout the way is really what it taught me. And experiment, don't take 6 months to build something, put it out in market and realize it's failed. Maybe launch with a beta or launch something quicker and do a bit more experimentation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think the nice thing about storytelling and narratives is it's usually the first draft isn't right, and but you can improve it and change it pretty quickly, I think, if you're adaptable, which is good because changing some of your story is pretty easy compared to changing a product. What I think of when I think of this, I think there's been a few times where our initial positioning of a product is just not right. I remember we had this, there's a product at HubSpot we called Projects, which was sort of this templated tool, but and then we've done it at Pendo a few times too, where we name a product and there's expectations in the market for what the product will do based on the name and the initial positioning. And if you don't meet those expectations, or if the expectations in the market aren't what your product actually does, there's sort of this mismatch in the sales process that has happened to me a few times. So it's if you say you've got if you are trying to introduce something that kind of looks like a project management tool and you're sort of positioning it as a project management tool, people are going to come in and are going to expect certain things out of it. Like at Pendo, we launched a session replay tool that now is like a really good session replay tool. But I think when we launched it, there's like these expectations in the market that like were bigger than what we thought then we delivered it first. And so like I think that's happened to me a few times where like if you're going to go in with certain positioning, you really need to know like the expectations that your buyers are going to have in the market for that. Even if it's not on your roadmap, they will just assume that you are going to be able to do X, Y, and Z because that's how you position your product. So that's what it makes me think of.
Yeah, and if I can build on that, I think I was reflecting on kind of my 3 different startups before Adobe. 2 of them were really trying to create categories. And for those of you who have never tried to do that, it's 1, really hard, and 2, very expensive. And I think it's not only trying to figure out what is your positioning, but what is your framing of the positioning, like what landscape do you want to play in, and really defining who your competitors are. And I'm not sure in either case we quite got it right the first time. And we spent lots of time getting alignment because we were trying to get that strategy and get that story. But it was in some cases we were ahead of where the market was going to be, and in other cases we were just wrong. And I think we got caught up in the sexiness of category creation. Instead of kind of first principles, who are we going after? What are the pain points? And really just being okay with telling that story and letting the category evolve on its own.
Yeah, I've never been part of category creation. It seems like it's a stressful thing because you're have
It's
to take
very
something that's currently existing and tell them there's a brand new category that's kind of mirroring this old one, but that's your old way to do things. Here's a new one. Here's a brand new name, and here's how it's different without like going into your solution. I don't envy you. The next question here is, how do you get alignment across the org in storytelling and messaging? I guess, Katie, when you're trying to create a new category, how does that kind of impact with everything?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is no easy way. It just comes down to the dynamics across the functions. I think product marketing in our day-to-day, we influence a lot without authority, and driving alignment of really the strategy, because I do agree with Marcus, the story is the strategy, and then the execution takes a big lift. And there's a couple different things I've had success with over the years. One is just starting with a positioning workshop across every single function and making sure everybody's on the same page. Sometimes you don't need to do that. Sometimes you do. I've also benefited from bringing in an external consultant in to really help facilitate that as well, because it brings in third-party best practice. And you really just need to kind of figure out, are you early at the company? Do you have those relationships that you can leverage to do the former? Or do you really need to kind of bring in another resource to help facilitate kind of those foundational discussions? Because as we all know, if you don't get the foundation right, the rest of it really doesn't matter. And then along the way, I think things that I've learned are, bringing as much customer research and data to those conversations, testing, almost beta testing the messaging and bringing it back in. And so constantly just being dynamic about that. But I think getting something good that everybody's aligned on is quite a heavy lift. But if you can invest the time with like 1-day or 2-day workshops, it really does pay off.
Yeah, I really like that. I think what I would add to Katie's, I agree with everything she said. Like what I would add to it is probably like don't underscore the amount of time it takes, like especially with the big narrative development. Getting alignment takes a long time, and the earlier you kind of put, one of the things we do at HubSpot is we put early revs very quickly in front of people, just to open it up to commenting different points of view. So like getting the person invested very early is really helpful. And then I almost have like this internal comms strategy, like who am I going to share with? When am I going to share with? And that's as equally as important and that as an external document. So we know that we are, we're taking it across and doing several revs with different people across the organization. And then I'd say like, I always try to look at if a sales rep can repeat back my messaging or my positioning to me. That's a really quick and easy way to like a muster test to be like, no, this is really tough. It's a very hard story. And if they can do it, and if we do talk to customers, sharing those clips back in the iterative and design process is also something I've found success with. That helps.
To build on all that, I think it's all great. I think the alignment helps when you've got when you do positioning right, and when there's leadership buy-in. I think too, also for like, as a PMM, you really got to be the champion of the story and just like sort of be like a force of nature inside of the company when it comes to like delivering the story and reminding people about it and creating the collateral and pushing the sales team and pushing the marketing team. I think if there's not that sort of like person who really is just there always trying to remind people about it, and just who really, really cares about it and sort of like carries the weight of the story for their product area, it's way more likely to fail. So I think that's something that's helped me in my career. And when I see the PMMs on my team like really do that well, there was a woman who presented at our town hall yesterday. She just did a demo of like a new product area, but it started like with her story for the product area. And she just like the enthusiasm and the quality of the story in front of the whole company. It was just awesome. And I think really helps, with that like alignment across the org that you can do without, making sure like your CEO is bought into something, which is harder.
Mm-hmm. I think just to add on to that, one thing that really helped me is part of my sales enablement role at a previous company. I would do voice of customer calls with the whole field team. And on one of these calls, the customer basically verbatim said our messaging back to our entire field and our 3 value pillars. And I think right then and there is where everyone kind of hit that light bulb moment of, okay, this is the right thing to be talking about. This is the right way to phrase everything. And Nisha, I really liked your idea of pitching it to the salesperson to see, does this work? Does it not? I would also go a step further and say, like, if there's a newer employee, to show it to them if they're newer to the company and to the space, because then you can kind of take away some of those biases of, well, we've always said X, Y, and Z, why we should continue to say it. If it doesn't make sense, then maybe it's time to reevaluate. All right. What approach do you take in crafting messaging when your differentiator is an extremely technical product with a proprietary algorithm? Oof. I don't know who wants to take that one.
Because I actually did this at Radius. So as I was leaving, they were trying to start the second category creation they were trying to do was CDP. But when I was there, we had an underlying data platform. We were trying to marry first party and third party data together to create a business graph, much like Facebook social graph. And that was a complicated story. It was a typical startup where you create really cool tech and then you try to find product market fit. And what we ended up seeing a lot of traction with were fintech companies that were doing marketing. And so there was ways for them to do kind of data appendage to what we had, and then do direct mail, email campaigns, and then we were layering in predictive scoring. So I just give you the landscape of everything we were doing. So that was like a lot to kind of underscore. We started off with use cases on a wheel. It was kind of like choose your own adventure for the sales team. That didn't work that great. And we ended up coming up with this concept because we knew that your CRM and your MAT were really important in MarTech, and we thought the data was the foundation. And so we started, instead of a system of record, we coined the phrase a network of record, and we tested that with customers, and it really resonated. And so what we did was essentially we branded our approach and the term to help make it more understandable, because our buyers weren't technical. Our buyers were typically the CMO or a senior leader in marketing. But through the buying process, we had, everybody in the reviews, security, technical, whatnot. And so it just helped get everybody speaking the same language. And we were pretty successful kind of pre in doing that. But it took a lot of work. I think, just to underscore Nisha's point, I think it took us about 6 to 9 months. from kind of story inception, branding that, putting all the enablement into the market, and then seeing kind of the first traction of that. So I don't know who asked that. If that helps, I'm happy to answer more details offline if helpful.
Yeah, those are good. To build on that, I mean, I think I think one thing as a, PMM, it's good to just do your best to learn the technology as best you can, to like spend that time with the product team and really try to immerse yourself in it. I do think sometimes when there's a it's like most PMMs aren't people who went to like school for CS or something like that, right? But when you spend the time to learn those really complicated technical things, like usually your brain can figure out like interesting ways to think about it. So don't take that shortcut. I sometimes see people try to do storytelling on top of a technical product without like at least really trying to learn it. And I always feel like it just falls flat. And then I think the thing that always helps me here is just like, telling the story of what's possible with it, right? Like, it's like, what does this do that others can't? And like, how does that come to life through interesting stories? So it's like, cool, you've got this technology, like, okay, but like, what does it mean for you? What does it mean for the companies you sell to or whatever? And then like, what are those use cases or new ways of thinking or like, what's possible that wasn't before with this stuff? That's what I think it gets pretty cool.
I love what both Katie and Marcus said, right? What really resonated with me is, again, what is the value of the customer and what are the use cases? What is the pain that it's solving for the customer? Rather than orienting yourself around the tech and the details there, it's ultimately what is the tech doing to make the life of the customer more productive, easy, faster, and how is it saving? I'll give you the example of like when I was at Sage, and to Marcus's point, it was a very highly technical product. It was ERP software for manufacturing companies. I had never been in manufacturing. So I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to land this? But you know what I did? I just like went to the customer side and really understood why they were finding success in this one category, which was like food and beverage. And what I realized was that basically the ERP had the ability to take a end product which had many ingredients and kind of break them down into where the ingredients came from, because by dissecting it you can have food security, and like that was the value. So then we were able to, by understanding the complex problem it solved, translate it into value for the customer and also find other markets and opportunities where they have end product that has some part of many different products, and like find more market fit for it. So I think I just orient back to, it's less about the tech, it's less about like, focusing just on the technical aspects, but how does it solve and make the life of your customer easier is how I would orient.
Yeah, I think in that example, you kind of showed like the first draft of the story isn't always the one that's going to stick. You have to constantly interview customers and learn from them and figure out how they're getting value out of a new feature or product that's going to market. And it may work one day, but the next day the story may completely change because a majority of your customers have found a new way to use that product and find value from it. All right, I think I have time for one last question before I turn it over to the audience. How do you measure the effectiveness and success of your story?
I mean, for me, like the quick hacks, I would say are, longer term, you're looking at lifts and adoption, but I think it's again back to how many times, like, is a salesperson actually using it? We've enabled them, we've trained them. It's just as simple as listening to their gong calls or listening to them in a pitch. Are they actually using your decks and documents? Are they actually talking about the product the way? And sometimes, I'll say at HubSpot, I still see those like OG decks, like going back like 2020. So I'm like, oh, okay, that landed. You're not using the stuff that, we created in the
They
past
got some
4
of my
years.
slides, some slides that I made back from
Right? Yeah.
2016 that are still in there. Yeah.
But it's really telling. And I very often just ask salespeople, I'm like, hey, could you share with me your deck or like in your pitch to the customer or your demo, and like get the gong call. And that really tells me everything I need to know in terms of, did my positioning land or not? And then you can go deeper, right? Like, do you just not know about it? And is there a discovery problem, or is there a discovery problem? Is there not a discovery problem, but there's an understanding problem? And is it not that easy. And then I think there's other mechanisms of like website testing and doing A/B testing over there where you can really test. You can test via email that I really adopt, but I kind of want to give space to Marcus and Katie to tack in their ideas.
Yeah, I mean I think tools like Gong are awesome. Like, you really quickly see just like, are people using this message, and are those turning into deals? I got a demo of a there's more product marketing software being built, which I love. There's this company called Troop.ai, and they do a lot of like they're doing like message adherence, and then trying to like plot like, or how much more successful are sales teams who use your messaging, and there's very cool work like that being done. I mean, I always, whenever whenever we bring a strong narrative to the marketing team too, it always performs better. And, versus when the teams are sort of like coming up with their own thing, and they're like the stories are disconnected. But, I see when you have a really strong, clear narrative, and the webinar and the launch content and like the event and the whatever, or the launch video are all connected, like I generally see those assets like perform better than those that don't. And like I think that's just an easy way to think about this. Like when you spend the time on storytelling and then bring it to life being via some marketing, that marketing should do better, and like it consistently does. And if it's not, then like maybe you miss the mark with your storytelling. So those are some things that I always look to and report on. And then like some of it is not measurable too, and I think that's okay, right? Like I think it's really good to get feedback from your executives and from sales and from these teams who just have a good sense, and like will give you and customers, right? And like what do they say? I think you need that qualitative data to sort of like just to pressure test stuff.
Yeah, I agree with everything both of you have said. I think the only thing I would add, over my time as a product marketer, I have really discovered, or I believe very strongly, that starting in the product strategy portion of the storytelling is really critical to success. If you are working with your product manager partners and kind of bringing that voice of the customer and identifying with them, hey, there's a lot of untapped demand here, there's a lot of people who have this problem, and then kind of stay in tune with them as they're developing that solution, and can then test your story with beta participants, even alpha participants, so that by the time you get to kind of bringing that bigger narrative to life, you've already almost been in your own kind of incubation of the story. That's where I found it to be the most powerful, because a story can only do so much if the underlying product value isn't there. And I think sometimes we forget about that piece, because we as marketers, we can put a lot of lipstick on pigs, but they're still pigs. And I think it's just really, really important as you evolve, and it comes through experience, I believe, to really start to develop a point of view in the inbound storytelling process and product development process as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Let's turn it over to the attendee questions here. So the first one we have is, how do you craft a story when your ICP spans multiple segments and personas with different pain points and use cases?
Pendo's a lot like that. We have very wide, got a lot of different industries, a lot of different use cases, a lot of different personas. I mean, I think you're just to maybe push back on the question a little bit, like your ICP probably shouldn't span all that many segments and personas. When I think of the ICP, I think of the ideal customer profile. Like, where do you have the strongest product market fit? Who are the customers who are the happiest with you, who are paying you the most? Like, you can't get distracted too much by anybody that could use your product, or like, oh, hey, there's this big market over here, and like we've had a little bit of success with them. Like, what if we, like, you can't, I think like that can be sometimes distracting. And generally, like, there's usually like 80% of your revenue is coming from 20% of your potential customers. So I would just say, like, make sure you know who your ICP is, and don't get distracted by opportunities that aren't. You want to make sure you resonate with your ICP first. And then there's always ways to sort of like branch out from the core story into new markets and into new use cases and new industries and that sort of thing. So that helps me at Pendo where we have this problem.
Yeah, I like that, Marcus. It's like focusing. I mean, it also tells you need to get deeper. You need to kind of go back to your data to understand where is your 80% coming from, and just focus there. Because if you're not, you can just be spread so many different ways. And I've seen that movie many times over. So I would go back and say, hey, where are those 2 or 3 industries that you're really, where your customers are naturally gravitating towards, and that's your fit. The second thing I would say is like in HubSpot, we have we have a push up market, but we're trying to get to a higher ASP player. And then we have a push down market where we're trying to establish volume. So it's almost like we're trying to get to the small business. We're trying to get to 2 different audiences there. The one thing that we are actually in the process of doing right now is trying to understand, well, for both of these audiences, what is the common denominator and what do we want to be? What do we want if it's the big company or the small company them saying about HubSpot, and where are we okay being not so great, and just being very clear across the organization on that. And we've landed on like easy, fast, and unified is where we want to be good, regardless of if it's up market or down market. So you'll actually start to see this in some of our messaging and positioning next year. So preview to you guys, but like that's where we're saying is the common denominator that we want, no matter who the customer, to know that as HubSpot, and then kind of bifurcate from there. But I don't know if that's helpful, but I just wanted to share that. Yeah.
Yeah, Katie, anything to add?
No, I think the question is about one product. I mean, obviously at a bigger company like Adobe, we have an Adobe story, we have a Creative Cloud story, we have each individual product story. And so we have a different set of problems with like a portfolio management and clarity. I think clarity and focus is what all of us are saying. And so if this is in service to one product, I would really push you to focus on one audience and really nail that. And of course, you'll have Halo. And then once you nail that, that's when you can kind of expand. But it also probably depends a little bit on your motion. Like, are you land and expand, different departments? You know, there's so many factors that kind of go into play there. But I think we're all saying focus.
All right, next question here is, as a PMM, a key goal is to enable sales to effectively tell a story. What best practices do you recommend here to build sales trust in the story, and how to best utilize it in discovery calls?
Yeah, I can kick us off if
There you go.
I mean, yeah, I mean, one thing I always try to do is I try to lead by example. So if I can't deliver the story to the sales team, then you know, how are they going to? So I think like it's important. You're a PMM, but you got to be a cross-functional wizard. You're not going to go and sell, but I do think you got to just like be able to put on that, you know, that hat and like teach people the story as if you were delivering something, and give them the talking points and show them the slides that you want them to use, and hope that they emulate that. I think that resonates with salespeople, where they can see the, you know, they see you do the thing that they need to do. Also, like, I just try to leverage a sales team as much as I can, you know, like if we, like one thing we do is if we're launching a new product and we're educating the sales team about it, we'll get a salesperson who's been having conversations with customers in the beta period, and we'll get them onto the call, and we'll have them explain how they're delivering the messaging and the story that like we've been working with them on. And sales, you know, they love hearing from the product marketing team, but I think it resonates even more with them when they hear a salesperson talking about what it's really been like for them to do the thing. If we can't do that, we'll share like, you know, calls that we pull out a gong in there. Or like clips directly from customers, just that sort of proof and validation from people on their team has always really helped me.
Yeah, I think we've spoken to this a little bit. I think of the sales team as customer zero almost in a way, unless somebody at a department in your company would be the prospect. You really have to think about them as kind of your customer, and how not only can you get them to understand what it is you want to do, but then to take it and own it and be able to deliver it as their own. And I think The other thing to think about with the sales team is that the relationship is two ways. Like I get so much value from listening to the sales team, both from discovery calls or from win-loss analysis or other ways. It just brings in a different perspective. And they often are bigger than the marketing team. And so you can really put that scale to use to kind of give you signal and feedback on your story as well.
Yeah, I would say all of the above, like all the things that Marcus and Katie said. You know, like I said before as well, I always look at the decks and always look at the con calls. But early on, like I involve them in the process of even developing the story and make sure that they see what you're seeing as the change as well. Like this is, you know, it all really just comes down to, is there that change and is the story believable, authentic, simple, that a salesperson can kind of take. If your story is too complicated, has multiple parts to it, chances are they're not going to use that. But give your salespeople early and often the opportunity to provide that real feedback and then show them that you are editing it based on their feedback. It just goes a long way. But I feel like that's common sense, less product marketing sense. But I think that goes just a long way in saying you'll edit it, taking their feedback along the journey and editing it.
Yeah, no, that's huge. I think it's a great point. And like you're saying, Katie, they give a lot of value to you too. Like I think sometimes PMMs or maybe I have and PMMs and like my team, they'll get upset if sales is like not using the materials like the way we wanted them to. But like, look, if they're closing deals and it's working for them, then it's working. Like don't worry about how they're doing it. And in that instance, you probably need to learn something from them. You don't ever want to be, I don't ever want to be like the messaging police necessarily, you know, I want to give them the raw materials to go out there and do amazing work. But you know, sometimes salespeople will do funny things and if it works, and great, you know, like what can we learn from them?
Yeah, I love that. And Katie, I love what you said. Think of your sales team as customer zero. Test everything out with them first and see if it sticks. And Marcus can't agree with you more. I learned the message or learned that the hard way of, you know, taking it personally when they're not staying on script. And really comes down to just give them the guidelines, give them the talking points, and let them go and, you know, interpret it the way that they want to. I think we have time for a few more questions. So, and y'all have touched on this a few times, but just going to go ahead and ask it again. What is the most effective way to drive adoption of new messaging and storytelling with the sales team post enablement?
So I'm not sure there's a post enablement. I think enablement is kind of always ongoing. And I say that because your product isn't static, right? You're constantly adding value. And so I think, you know, I alluded to just in my last answer about the relationship. I think it's having, when I was doing B2B, I'm primarily doing digital now, but when I was doing B2B, we had weekly enablement sessions where we were always kind of walking them through something, whether it was something new to the product or it was a new sales approach or it was them sharing back. And then we weekly also had kind of a roundup on what they were hearing on calls. And then monthly we did a win-loss analysis. And so I think having a cadence where it's a shared kind of information flow is really important. Because it's not like you're one and done with enablement. It's never done. And I also think you learn a lot as the messaging is out there to adapt, and then you can use the enablement sessions as a way for one salesperson to share what's working for them with the rest of the field as well.
I would leverage, you know, I've always had, I think you get a ton of bang for your buck from your like at HubSpot we had inbound and like we would work on those keynotes, like product keynotes or company keynotes, and like just like the messaging that's there will be like, you know, gospel for your team. Same thing with like company kickoff. I work with our like you know, our CPO and a GM SVP of product on like their product keynote, and like that product keynote ends up like, you know, those slides and that messaging, like you just get the whole company together and you get everybody. So I think those events, like I always spend a ton of time on those, you know, what may be like a 10-minute or 30-minute presentation, but it's just in front of such a big stage that it usually like is very, very effective in addition to the normal cadence of enablement that you have.
Yeah, plus one to that, and what I'll say is like it takes a minute, like don't, the one thing I will say is that we are trying to orient towards is like actually put out a message there and then give it time in market for like every salesperson to be across it, for them to practice it where it starts to feel like second nature. That's just really, really important. And then you got to celebrate the ones that are already doing it. We actually now also do pitches from senior leaders besides what Marcus talked about in the keynote, but it's like, quick 5-minute pitches from a senior leader actually recording how they would sell it. So that sales also has those moments where they can learn. And that has proved to be very effective. But yeah, I think adoption is two ways as well. And like some messages might land, some might not. So how do you also go back and make it dynamic? But I wouldn't be very quick to change the message until it really sticks and it becomes second nature.
All right, last question for y'all. How do you handle messaging when your product market fit is in the SMB/commercial, but your company is going up market? Nisha, I think you mentioned that you had the up market and then kind of the bottom market focus. Maybe that's a good question for you.
Yeah, I think it's again, for us, it's really become because we don't want to be one person with like two heads or like, schizophrenic in a way. So it's really, we had this exercise and like, well, what do we want to be known at? And we actually emulated companies like Walmart, and we emulated 7 companies to say, what is Walmart actually okay being horrible at, and where do we, and then we actually got all our seniors and leaders in the room and did an exercise. And this was actually, Katie, back all the way back to your point about bringing external consultant. And we brought somebody in as an external consultant and did a whole exercise with us. And like, we mapped all the places that we are, all the criteria versus B2B and CRM software, and then where we want to be good and where we want to be excellent and where we are okay actually being bad. And that is across the board for the value seekers and the upmarket seekers. And sometimes it's all about that alignment, right? Because you might want, like our salespeople might want customization enough to be known for that, but that's not what we want to be known for. We want to actually be known for easy and fast. And like, you have to sometimes double down over there, right? Like you might think the upmarket buyer says, well, I don't really want easy. We're holding, so you're making those calculated bets as well, but you are being out there and saying, this is who I am to the market, no matter who, and then you're building off of that.
The only thing I'd add to that, I'm sure you all went through this. I mean, it's the classic motion that a lot of companies go through as you start an SMB and you want to get into enterprise, is really understanding what matters to enterprise. And there's lots of fun security and other things that are just, they're required. And then there's additional functionality at scale because you're talking about teams of tens of thousands instead of maybe tens or even, 100. And so I think it's a lot of what we've been talking about is like, know your audience, know what the value is that they're looking for and how your product can bring that value. And there's ways to tell that story. It sounds like this is what you all leaned into, was like the overall benefit of what you offered. And then I'm guessing by the different channels that you went through, you talked to different audiences that were in those channels slightly differently, depending on what mattered to them. And then within those accounts, like the different buyers and other people who are part of the buying process, what matters to them as well. Like what matters to the CMO is going to be different than what matters to the chief legal officer, for example.
Yeah, those are my two dots too. Like, yeah, it's the like we're doing a lot of marketing AI to our customer base, but and our like champions and users are excited about it. But like, at the bigger companies, like they're kind of scared of it. And like what they want to talk about is like security and compliance and like how are you going to make sure this is safe for us? And so you gotta have those conversations. And then also like yeah, like the buying committee I think is more of a thing in the, you go up market and like, right, there's going to be a lot more people involved. You're going to have you know, we have like below the line language for the users and above the line language for the decision makers. And like, we want to reach the people with the budget, but also, I think just being aware of who's making decisions and who's in the committee and what's important to who, like you're saying, Katie, is super important for enterprise.
I love that above the line, below the line messaging. I'm gonna borrow that because it's like you've got the key points and then you've got the extra points. But if you can just nail the key ones, that's important.
Yeah, yeah, you need both, right? It's like you don't want to, you know, you can't. I think if you just talk to, if your marketing and messaging is like just above the line and you're only talking to like the CFO, it's like you're probably never going to get that meeting anyway, you know? So you got to kind of start with the users and people who are going to actually use the software, but also appeal to the decision makers. And, you know, it's helpful for us internally.
Yeah, the other thing we do is also we enable the champion and like how they can be our internal advocates and what is those messages for them. Yeah.
So you're saying with the for the champion, you kind of give them that above the line messaging to go and sell it to whoever the decision maker is within their own organization.
Yeah,
and
there's so
equip them
much
that way.
thing that happens, right? So you have to not only go to the decision maker and all the committees, but then it's also how do you empower the champion to really be that person for you.
I like that. Great. Well, Nisha, Katie, Marcus, it's been great. I will hand it back over to Alex.